Greetings, folks. Sealer here. Today is Thursday, August 13th. Wargaming has announced on the World of Warships development blog a series of changes they are working on for submarine battles and submarine warfare. These are based on the feedback and data they collected from the public testing earlier this year. These changes are not yet ready for the public to test. I think Wargaming is just trying to keep the community apprised of what they're working on and the direction that they're taking. Wargaming in particular notes that they are trying to reduce the gameplay load on destroyers. And I know that from my own experience and the experience of a number of my colleagues, and what I saw out in the forums and YouTube videos, etc., is this is among the biggest concerns with submarines. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate here about whether submarines should even be in the game. That deserves its own video, and it has obviously is loaded with opinion and emotion. But if they're going to be in the game, I know that the current implementation, the biggest concerns, or among the biggest concerns, was the increased demands on destroyer players. So getting to the changes, first is the mechanics of sonar pings are going to be somewhat easier for the submarine players. Instead of getting a ping lock on the stern and bow, they can get a single ping lock on any part of the ship. And the animation that's being shown here looks like it's getting a lock on the forward third of a ship. Now, they've noted here that the torpedoes will home in on that area, but if a submarine player gets a second lock on that same area, then the torpedo will bypass the torpedo protection of the ship. However, if the second ping locks onto a different part of the ship, then it effectively acts as a reset of the homing, and the torpedo will home in on that new area. So I think this is intended to make it easier to get a lock for submarine players. But in order to get sort of those very high damaging Citadel hit style torpedo strikes, they have to get that double ping on the same location. So some part of the sonar pinging will be easier. Other parts will require more skill. But in the end, hopefully this means a better balance in terms of the homing torpedoes. Now, they also note here that, and this is what the ship looks like with a lock on part of its hull. So the player that's being targeted will actually see which part of their ship is being targeted. And it also says here that if the visibility between the highlighted part and the incoming torpedoes is lost, then the homing stops. So I'm assuming that means that if the ship is able to turn in a way to basically hide or basically obscure the locked part of its ship from the torpedo, then the torpedo will no longer home in on that area. At least that's the way that I read this. And I think this is probably also to give targeted ships some countermeasures when they are locked on by torpedoes. All right, the next item is battery mechanics are being changed. So during the test, they noted that when a submarine was running at 1/4 speed, batteries recovered, and the submarines could remain underwater indefinitely. It looks like they want to change that. So what they're saying here is that if the battery charge is at 30% or higher, they will continue to recover battery charge and will not be consumed in motion. However, if a battery charge is dropped below 20%, then the maximum speed of the submarine and the width of the sonar ping will be reduced, and then it will be reduced even further if the battery charge drops below 10%. So the way I read this is that Wargaming is trying to incentivize the submarine players to recharge their batteries, and if they let their battery charges get too low, the submarines become less combat effective, and I think that's a good balance and a good balance of strike, with those changes, rather than allowing submarine players to remain underwater indefinitely. Okay, next item is they're adding some anti-submarine armaments for battleships and heavy cruisers. So what's being implemented here are the battleships and heavy cruisers will be able to call in anti-submarine defense planes. And when they choose this type of, I think this is effectively a consumable. They call it a weapon, but it raises the camera and sets a reticle on the approximate location of the submarine. It says that there will be an aiming reticle that will allow the player to select a point within a radius of about 10 kilometers, into which, after a while, an aircraft will drop a depth charge. The charges of the anti-submarine armaments will gradually be restored. That's how it works for destroyers and like cruisers, is that they have to sort of it's like a consumable. They have to restore that charge, and let's see. And then battleships and heavy cruisers will be able to locate where approximately a submarine is with the help of a hydrophone at 3 to 5 kilometers distance. So the way I read this is that it means that heavy cruisers and battleships will have some way to deal with destroyers on their own without having depth charge capabilities directly on their ship. They're basically calling in planes that act as a consumable to locate and drop depth charges on the submarine. So I think that's going to be a good balance. I also love the animation here because they're using a Bayern, which was a World War I era battleship, to do the anti-submarine warfare location of the submarine. So I thought that was kind of interesting. All right, next item was the hydrophone. So they're saying that the approximate location of a submarine from hydrophones of all ships will be shared with allies. So basically, if an ally locates a submarine through its hydrophone, all of the allies in the fleet will now get that information. And it says the radius of a destroyer's hydrophone has been increased to about 7 kilometers. That should make it easier to detect the submarine. This will lower some of the counter-submarine load on destroyers, although their depth charges are still the fastest and most effective way to destroy a submarine. So they still want destroyers to be the most influential or most able to deal or at least destroy submarines. But at least now the fleet will be aware of a submarine's location fleet-wide, so long as at least one ally has located a submarine. So I think, again, I think that's a good balance. The next item here is detectability of ships from submarines is being reduced by a third. So the example they give here is that if a destroyer is normally surface detected within 6 kilometers, a submarine will only detect the ship from 4 kilometers. So the submarine actually has to get closer. The next item they've got here is that a surface detection of a submarine will be 4.5 to 5 kilometers typically. So what that means, which is kind of interesting, is that if a submarine has surfaced, a destroyer will often locate or see the submarine before the submarine can see the destroyer, which obviously in terms of real world situations that probably wouldn't happen. But again, I think the intention here is to try to give a little more balance so that the submarine is, more easily countered than they were during the early part of the testing. It's also noted here that if a ship fires her guns, then a submarine will be able to see the ship from equal to her firing range, which makes sense. So if you have a ship that has a 10-kilometer firing range and she fires her guns and a submarine is surfaced within that 10-kilometer range, then she will see the ship that fired her guns. And that makes sense. All right, there's a few other changes that they've noted here. They are going to increase the time for a ship to dive from surface, and which protects them against high explosive weapons. I think the idea is to give the opponents against submarines more time to try to get shells on a surface submarine that's trying to go back down into the water. The depth at which a submarine is hit by rockets, bombs, and shells has been increased from 6 to 10 meters. So again, I think the idea here is to prevent situations where submarines are able to surface very quickly, do like a point-blank torpedo strike, and then immediately drop down below the water and basically have no counter or very little counter. I think this is intended to try to address some of those aspects. And then a few other changes they mentioned here. The underwater world is being updated. They're improving the visual effects, and they say other, several minor changes and fixes, although in this article they don't state what that is. So some interesting changes that are being worked on. The last comment here in the article is about what I stated earlier, that these changes are not yet ready for testing. They're just trying to keep us apprised of what they're working on. But again, some kind of interesting changes that are coming for submarine battles. Again, I'm not going to get into this video my opinions around that, whether submarines should even be in the game. Like I said, that deserves its own discussion. But if you were interested in playing submarines or playing against submarines, hopefully these changes make sense and are appealing to you. And for those of you who just hate the notion of submarines, this is not likely to change your opinion at all, but at least it's information. So I think that's going to wrap it up. Thanks much for watching. Please let me know your thoughts and comments in the comments below. And as always, we hope to see you out there in the virtual seas, and we wish you happy sailing.